5.
Cool,
But
cool.
we're not going to start. We'll let everybody trickle in for the next few minutes or
Okay.
so. But no, dude, that's really interesting, man. It's and it was funny. I was trying to figure out. I'm like, it's now your references, are they both? This is going to be interesting. Are they both photographs?
Yeah. So both of these
What?
guys are in the TV show Black Sails,
Oh, okay. I haven't seen it.
which
See, that is absolutely amazing, dude, because you're using, as I said, this is the first time I feel like an idiot. But for the first time, I get it. I
yeah,
actually now, because I did get it before, but it wasn't as apparent. And what I mean by that is like when you look at the stuff from Naughty Dog, it's realistic, right?
yeah.
It's hyper realistic, and it looks great. But there's still this quality
There's still a
where
stylization
there's
to it.
still a stylization
Yeah.
to it. And so, you kind of, start to go, okay, is that, necessarily the way it's sculpted or whatever? But I have to say, and I would imagine with them, there might be an element of that, because they have a huge art department, an art direction. But dude, just this example alone, I think it's a great,
Yeah.
it really highlights it because as I said, I look at the two and this dude looks definitely like, like a digi double, in terms of like, the quality of the realism of him.
Yeah.
And then this other dude looks like someone from freaking Uncharted. Like
Yeah, this
he
has,
has
yeah, there's a
that,
little bit more stylization on him.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
And
it's
that it
not
could be, I
like,
mean, it'd be interesting to do a render where I do
yes,
skin color
yes,
with
yes,
like the texturing XYZ and see what
exactly.
difference that makes.
I was
But the
thinking
thing
the
is
same thing.
I was looking at the reference, he has very specific like moles and like freckling and stuff that
Yeah,
you can't really get from the texturing XYZ stuff because I don't have,
exactly.
so I had to kind of hand do a bunch of that stuff. I guess I could blend the two and see if it works.
And see what it was. I am curious. It's like, if it was more, one was more photo sauce. Hey guys, I'm so sorry. We were just we were just going on and on about some character stuff. But no, you guys are not late. People are like, what the hell? Wasn't it at 12? It's like the whole session's already started. Sorry, Daniel. Habla español un poquito. No más. But hey guys, how's everything? So we're about to get started. We'll give everybody a few minutes to, kind of just trickle on in here. So where is everybody from? Kind of do a little shout out, see where everybody's from.
Yeah, interesting to see if this is evening for people or lunch
Yeah,
break
I
or
know. Yeah, exactly. Romania, Canada, Brazil,
right.
Argentina, Santa Monica, down the street from you.
I'm waiting for Italy to pop up. Come on.
Yeah, I know.
Where's yours?
Yeah. Where's the Italian folks? Atlanta, Germany. Actually, yeah. So, what time is it where you're located? We got Claudia at 9 p.m.,
There we
8
go. There we got an
p.m.
Italian.
There you
There we
go.
go. All right.
Yeah, there you go. Unless he just wrote, Italy just to, 3 p.m., 7 p.m. Oh, we have another Italian,
It's a
Matteo.
fun Friday night then, huh? 8 p.m.
Yeah,
Friday
I
night.
know.
Looking at
Friday night.
CG.
Right on. Cool. We'll give everybody another minute to trickle in. Hopefully everybody's doing good. I know everybody's from all over the world. We got 8 p.m. It's like 3 p.m., 7, 8 a.m. Got a little bit of everything. So it's hope you're enjoying your dinner, lunch, and breakfast. Czech Republic.
Right around the
Delphos
corner
and
in
Burbank.
Burbank. All right.
I know. Cool. All right. So I think we're gonna just
Let's do it.
just gonna get to it. All right. Hey everybody. My name is Manny, and thank you for joining us for another live session. Today we have a repeat, superstar, rock star artist, Pete Zappi. So as you guys know, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to jot them down in the chat. We already have some questions you guys have asked beforehand when you were signing up for the session. So we're going to kind of go between those and also some of the live questions as they come. Also, if you guys, if the resolution of the webinar is a little lower res, in in the bottom of your screen, you should be able to click on the YouTube link, which will take you to the YouTube player for a much higher resolution feed. All right. So, and also, I'm just do a little quick mic check with you guys. I should have done it earlier, but can you guys hear me loud and clear? Can you hear Pete? Am I too loud? Is everything
Make
good?
sure the levels are all right. Yeah.
Yeah. I know we've had that issue in the past.
All right.
So if we could just get a simple "Yep, sounds good" or "Sounds like crap."
Right. Yeah, looks like we're good.
Perfect. I tend to talk loud. At least that's what my wife says. So, if I sound a little too loud, you guys know where that's coming from. So, but anyway, all right, guys. So once again, lucky to have Pete Zoppi, who's a senior character artist at Treyarch. So you know what? I'm just going to shut up. And Pete, you want to introduce yourself
Cool.
to
Yeah.
the audience?
Thanks for having me. For a second time, the first time was fun. So I got some new stuff we can go through and look at. As Manny said, I'm a senior character artist at Treyarch. I've been there for about 10 years now.
Wow, it's been a decade.
Yeah, so I've been I worked on a James Bond video game there, and then I transitioned into the Call of Duty team. So I worked on Black Ops 1, 2, and 3. So and that, 2 years per game. Black Ops 3 was about 3 years. So yeah, that brings it pretty close to a 10-year period there. So and I've done a variety of different things there in terms of character related stuff. I know there's probably some questions that'll come up later about character related stuff. As time has gone on, it's become more and more, there's become kind of subsets of specializations within character pipelines with regards to faces and bodies and hair and further. I mean, there's so many different aspects to character related work. So I've touched a little bit of a lot of different things. And so I do, obviously with professional work, I do all game related stuff. So usually in my free time outside of work, I like to leave the game stuff and do more rendered cinematic, higher poly stuff without the sort of game restrictions of lower res maps and normal mapping and all that stuff. So it's a nice opportunity to kind of experiment with other tools and techniques that can kind of figure out ways to kind of port different tools and techniques into potentially game related assets. So I kind of do more high res stuff outside of work. And I enjoy doing this kind of portraiture character stuff. So we can start going through some of these. So I've been a big fan of the TV show Black Sails, and prior to I don't know, I guess the past few years, hair and fur systems have gotten significantly better. And I think prior to the past few years, it was always kind of a daunting task to figure out how to do decent hair and fur and get pretty quick feedback on it. And so I figured using these types of characters that have hair and fur would be a good opportunity to do some portrait work and then see what I could do in terms of pushing and learning more about doing hair and fur systems, because that was one thing that I never felt like I had really gotten a good grasp on. So and then also with a lot of the texturing XYZ stuff, so playing around with different workflows using that information to do realistic high frequency detail, and just kind of iterating up and trying to learn new ways of doing eyes, for example, and hair for color maps. So Manny and I were talking before we got started here that there's as part of my experimentation, both of these characters here utilize the texturing XYZ information for the high frequency detail. The difference being this one here, the color information was projected from the texturing XYZ color information, and then this one was more hand painted. So it was kind of an opportunity to see where what the pros and cons are to each method there. So we can go through. I think maybe even before going through, I'll kind of show some of the progression of some of the images, because sometimes it's easy to look at the final image and not really see what it sort of takes to get it up to that level. So I did a whole bunch of.
Do you have also some of the references you're using, Pete?
Yeah, so I took
For
a
some
bunch
of us who are
of
not familiar with the show.
yeah, so I took a bunch of screen grabs from the show. So let me go grab those. Um, so I had a whole bunch of screen grabs from the show, and then some that were not from the show, just to see, try to get an idea. In the show, he's got this mustache and goatee, but it was kind of important in some areas for the sculpting purposes to see him without mustache or goatee to really kind of get the chin shape correct. And then there's obviously too, in some of these, there's different hairstyles through the different seasons that he's had. I chose to go with more of like the buzz cut. So these are just general kind of random reference images here. And then this next set here is more from like screen grabs from the actual show itself. And so I just kind of use these to do the sculpting work and just look at reference for, the head shape, different expressions. It's interesting too, because trying to sculpt something in a neutral pose is different than kind of building some character. And so he's got a wide range of emotion that he can do through the eyes alone. So I kind of keyed in on different eye shapes that I wanted to hit. So a lot of times he's got more of this kind of brows down, kind of eyelid squinting going on. So I felt that was more indicative of the character himself. So I kind of went with that for some of my key reference, just to try to key in a little bit more on what that character is all about. And so finding different images from different views, so I can kind of really assess the different forms that are going on in terms of like cheekbone structure, forehead structure, and then one of the things that I really like looking at too is just trying to look at this stuff and having some background in photography, is understanding and looking at what kind of camera lenses were used to shoot this stuff, because it does certainly help when you're sculpting, like this image, for example, because this is a much longer focal length. There's a lot more compression on the face, so you get much more distance between the outer eyelids out to the ears, because it's compressing down the space and making the front of the face feel significantly smaller than something like even something, I can find something that's a little bit more straight on. Like this is a little bit more of a wider angle lens, and so we're not getting nearly as much compression. So I kind of have to keep some of those things in mind as I'm sculpting, is really kind of trying to keep an eye on the focal length and kind of how it's portraying the shapes of the face, because it's pretty easy to kind of get a little bit off track if you're not really taking into consideration what that focal length is kind of doing. So like in a scenario like this, let me just isolate this guy off. So if we go to like this camera, and I'll just set this to so this is like standard Maya, like 35 millimeter focal length, which if we want to kind of mimic the other image there, I can go to like a 200 millimeter, and you can really see how much more that kind of compresses the facial features. Where if we kind of fill the frame with something more of like a 24 millimeter lens, then zoom in much closer, you can see how much more distorted it gets. So that's, for me at least, it's important when I'm looking at reference to try to figure out um, what that focal length is and how that's kind of distorting the shapes, and I can kind of plug some of that information into. I do most of my sculpting in Mudbox. A big reason is the camera. I just like the feeling of the camera in here. And it certainly helps me again when I'm looking at the reference and piecing some of that stuff together. So let me just go through some of the progression. So this was like one of the first renders that I had done, just to test out some of the high frequency detail and some of the skin shader, just to see how things are shaping up. So I'll just kind of go through some of these, and this is just different variations and just kind of slowly iterating things up and changing things slightly. Kind of testing different lighting scenarios just to see how the forms are holding up in different lighting. And then this is just throwing initial base color pass on. This one was more hand painted. So just getting basic skin tones on. You'll notice, for me, one of the big things too with the mouth expression was that it a lot of it didn't really come together until I got a proper set of teeth in there that more accurately mimicked me see if we can find one here that more accurately mimicked his actual teeth shape. So he's got, let's see if we can find one here. So he's got, the teeth shape is for him was really important once I got it locked in. Let me see if we can find one here. Let me go to the other folder. So like here, you can see there's some crooked, the teeth are at a different angle. And once we kind of go through here and that I get teeth into decent position, and this is where I started to kind of test hair. But you can see the mouth expression doesn't really look good. The teeth aren't all that great. Even between some of these, just really changing subtle volumes as I'm kind of like doing test renders. It's just a very kind of slow, iterative process. Let me get the image here. So once these were like early test renders, and then I started to move into actually rendering things out at higher resolution. So this is starting to get those better teeth in there where I'm putting a little bit of that crooked teeth in there, but there were still some issues with the overall shaping. So the process itself is relatively slow and kind of moves its way up. I feel like I can get a general likeness going pretty quick, like within 4 to 6 hours, like rough things out and get a general likeness. And then, that maybe covers 50 or 60% of the process, but then the remaining 30 to 40% is generally takes me longer to really kind of fine tune things and really dial things in. And so that's a little on just some of the reference and some of the iteration process. And I'll just show the iteration process as well on this one here. Let me just go to the beginning. So this was one of the this is one of the first renders of just kind of like testing out hair, testing out skin shader, seeing how things are kind of coming together, doing different kind of hairstyling. You'll see hair kind of change a little bit between these, and then there's slight expression changes. So here you can really kind of see some of the differences in some of the hair here in terms of, and I'll cover some of this in XGen when we start looking at some of that, but you can kind of just see the slow iteration process of just kind of fine tuning things as I move forward with it. So I'll just take a quick look at his reference as well.
Absolutely amazing, Pete. Great job, man.
So let's see, thanks. So I didn't have as much reference of, this is Ray Stevenson, so I didn't have as much reference of him at this particular age. I had some images of him a little bit younger, and then I found this, which is around the same age, but this again gave me some more information on chin shape, jaw shape without the actual beard, just to make sure that things were kind of coming together a little bit. And again, there's even kind of scrubbing through these, he looks significantly different here than he does here, and a lot of that is just lens choice and that sort of thing. So yeah, so doing likenesses can be pretty challenging in terms of just dialing in all those shapes, because you can, so sometimes I try to key in on a few images and not stray too far from a few key images, because once you start using hundreds of images as part of your reference and they're all with different focal lengths, you can start to get a little confused in terms of the forms that you're seeing, and sometimes it can things can stray a little bit. So I try to limit to a few key images and work off of those and try to nail things from some of those key images. So once I kind of get the rough sculpt going, actually I can, let me see, let me open another Mudbox window here so I can look at the earlier stage of this. Let's see if this will load. Okay. So this was a, let me bring this over. So this was this is like the rough block out stage where I'm just kind of blocking out the head. If we look at the wireframe, it doesn't even go up past level 2. So I'm really trying to establish the overall likeness in these really low, like 2 or 3 lowest subdivision levels. And then, for this character, he doesn't really come together until you throw in that beard and that long hair, and that starts to help frame the face. So it was important to kind of block this out at an early stage too, just to see how things were coming together. So once I get it to this stage, then I can start kind of fine tuning and move it more towards this, where start using the texturing XYZ stuff. And then I ported the XGen hair into here as well, which you can go to. Let me get this back to like 35. So you can select any of the XGen hair and do, there's, where is it? Convert XGen primitives to polygons. So when I do that, I actually take the, if we go to XGen, like on the beard, for example. So with XGen, you have to kind of work, there's sort of two different ways to work, at least for me, is this width of hair is really good for rendering. So when I look at the, if we look at the final, like these images, that width of hair is working pretty well for this render. But even in the viewport here, as once we zoom out, it gets a little tough to see because they're so fine. And then when I want to export this out to, let me just do preview current. When I want to export this out into, say, Mudbox, for example, or convert it to polygons, I'll basically take the density much lower. So I'll do something like 20 maybe. So that really thins it out, and then I'll just ramp the width of the hair up to, like, I don't know, 0.5. We'll see what that does. That gets too big. So, you know, something that's a little bit more manageable. I don't need to see all of the hairs in Mudbox, but just to get a general feeling of where that hair is. But I don't, you know, again, I don't want to export out the super, super fine hair because it just gets really, really hard to see. Like even here, I have to really start to zoom in to really see each individual hair strand just because it aliases out from this distance. So as I'm working, I'll kind of flip back and forth between different widths in different densities just to see what it's doing. And then as I start doing test renders, I'll start lowering the width and upping the density so it kind of fills things out, and I actually end up getting better renders out of that. And then for, let's go back here. So let me isolate this. So on this, I have a bunch of different sculpt layers. What I've been doing is, let me just put the color on here. Just give us a second. And so I photo projected the texturing XYZ stuff, and this stuff is great. I've done some experiments on my own with doing cross-polarized photography, shooting my own reference, and it works really well because it removes all of the specular highlights and shading information. The texturing XYZ stuff is great because all of this stuff projects on nice and clean. I'll take a look here at what some of that information actually looks like. Let's see. Just give me 1 second. So this is what you can get from some of that texturing XYZ stuff. And there's no, you know, all the shading has been removed. So it makes projecting this stuff on really quick and easy. And I don't have to spend that time removing little bits of shading and trying to paint out highlights and that sort of stuff. So this process works really well for photo projecting that stuff on. And it works really well with regards to skin shading. Because with skin shading for games, sometimes you can have a little bit more shading inside the color texture, but for stuff that's rendered in Maya with either V-Ray or Arnold, you want to try to remove and get rid of as much of that shading as possible because it ends up fighting quite a bit with the skin shader itself. So I try to get all of that removed out. And then then I'll also project the texturing XYZ information on as well for the high frequency bump information. And then what I'll do with this, so this is kind of funny because it's all kind of colorized. And what this actually gives me, let me close down a bunch of this stuff here. So what this will actually give me is, if we look at, let me pull that texture up here. Just give me 1 sec. So what that ultimately gives me, actually, I'll just load this one up because it's here. So this is what gets photo projected onto the surface, something like this. And if we look through the channels here, it's broken. It's a multi-channel image. So the red channel is kind of like the larger scale displacement information. The green channel is a bit more of the higher frequency bump information. And these two obviously completely correlate to each other. They're overlaid directly on top of each other. So there's a complete 100% sync up between these. And then the final blue channel here is the kind of microstructure on top of the skin that breaks the highlights up even further. So what I'll do is I'll project this on, and what you'll see here is that's what this is. So I project this on as color information, and then I go into Photoshop and extract the channels off. And so I'll show you what that looks like. So let me bring these two in. And I do this at, these are at 8K resolution. I try to maximize the amount of resolution that I have. So basically I have the larger scale displacement information, and then I have the green channel here, which is the kind of bump information. And then what I'll do is I'll come into Mudbox. Let me turn this off. And with the mesh selected, I'll just go to UVs and maps, and I'll do sculpt using map, and I'll load in. So if we look at operation 2, this is pulling in the essentially like the bump information. And if we look at the other one, sculpt using, and we look at operation 1, it's pulling in what I call the displacement. So I basically, what I sort of internally call it is displacement and bump. And then these get applied directly onto the surface as sculpt layers. And so what you see here is I have them broken off. I have the displacement. Let me turn this off. And this might take a second. This is pretty high resolution. I think I'm at like 50 or 60 million polygons on this. So this is kind of the raw sculpt underneath, and then layering on. This gives me the flexibility here to layer on this really high frequency noise, and then layer on the displacement, and then I can kind of mix and match the intensities based on, I can start doing test renders and then see what it's looking like, and I can come back in here and rebalance these. So maybe if it's looking a little too noisy, I could reduce down some of the bump information here. So I could knock this down to like 20%. And you'll see that kind of smooths things out a little bit. Or I could choose to make this far more kind of crunchy and high fidelity. So I could really kind of crank that up, and that'll give me kind of a different look. So it's really kind of flexible for just juggling these layer intensities. And then I'll just do extract a new displacement map on this. And I always do 32-bit floating point EXRs, and these plug into V-Ray and in Arnold pretty well. The other thing I like to do is have a base mesh that I start sculpting on from a pretty early stage that has UVs, so that when I actually do the displacement extraction, I'm using the subdivision method instead of a ray casting method. And the subdivision method works really well because you won't get any clipping in any of your displacement. So like really tight areas, like if we come into this eyelid region where the eyelid kind of folds back underneath, this bit of flesh here. Let me just turn these off so it's a little bit easier to see. So with ray casting method, a ray from this eyelid might strike this piece of flesh here, and you may get some clipping issues. With the subdivision method, it knows that what each low resolution polygon, where that correlates onto the high poly, and so you don't get any kind of clipping and that sort of thing. So it kind of streamlines the process and removes any headaches that I may get from doing ray casting displacement extraction. And then once I have those maps, I'll load them up into Maya. And I've been I've been experimenting more with Arnold lately because of the AL skin shader, which have been really liking, but now it's actually available just recently in the past, I don't know, 4 months or so, 4 or 5 months maybe, it's now available for V-Ray. So you can use the AL shader in V-Ray, which if you're using it, if we come under the shader here, basically on the SSS, turning the mode to directional gives you this really nice render quality. So if we come back and look at, let me go back to this early stage where there's no color information. Let me get a higher resolution one. So it gives a really nice solid quality to the skin, and then you also get a nice amount of subsurface that bleeds in through the displacement information without it getting kind of like too washy. The other area it does really well with is like the lips, for example. Like it's a little harder to see on this one because the lips aren't together, but the directional mode really keeps the lips feeling solid and doesn't allow the light to kind of bleed through one surface and then penetrate another, and then you get this kind of weird sort of reddish tint that's kind of unrealistic in the lip area. So I've been really enjoying this shader, and it's kind of cool now that it's available for V-Ray as well as Arnold. And I don't think, I mean, the render times go up pretty significantly when you use it, but the quality results that I get out of it are far superior to other skin shaders that I've used. So I've been really enjoying this skin shader.
What's the name
Another
of the
thing,
shader? What's the name of the skin
it's
shader, Pete?
the AL shader pack for Arnold. So
Okay.
if you look up AL shaders, let me just bring up the website here.
Yeah, dude,
So
that's a great shot.
So if you come here, you can get the AL shaders. This is for the Arnold version, and then if you look up AL shaders for V-Ray, there's a download for it, and there's instructions on how to use it. But yeah, it gives a really nice quality to the skin that feels really good, that I just haven't been able to achieve with any other skin shader prior to this. So I'll just be continue to using this shader probably for the foreseeable future. And then the other thing that which I kind of experimented with, which I've kind of gotten some questions on here and there, is some of the eye stuff. So this is actually an earlier render, and what you'll notice on this that for me breaks a little bit of the believability is there's this kind of dark line between the eye and the whole like tear duct region here. And in reality, that this is attached onto the eye. So if you look in the mirror and move your eyes left and right, you'll see this bit of flesh actually stretch with the eye. So anytime I kind of see this shading here, and this generally occurs because this is a separate model from the eyeball itself. And so let me go forward a little bit and get into some different renders. So what you'll see here is that's now gone. This is a lower resolution render, but that issue is now gone. So what I've actually kind of changed my workflow a little bit in terms of my eyeballs now, and I actually just, if we look at this, I actually just model that into the eyeball itself, so it's considered one kind of continuous surface as it sort of exists realistically. And this could potentially be rigged and animated properly if you get really close to the eyes to get this to kind of like pull and stretch along with eyeball movement. The only thing that this kind of, you just have to make sure if you do this method that you get your pivot set properly on the eyeball itself. You can't just use the centered pivot on this anymore. If you center the pivot on this, and try to, oh, I guess I have them combined right now. But if you center the pivot on this, because this is sticking off, the eyeball is not going to, move realistically. So the pivot has to be appropriate to the eyeball. But this gives some really nice results in terms of a final render. So on him here as well, it's a little bit, so you can kind of see on this eye here, there's a much nicer blend between the sclera and then where it kind of connects in. There's a better blend with a little bit more light pushed into here. You'd probably see it a little bit better, but it gets rid of that kind of harsh shadow that occurs there when they're actually separate models. So that's another thing that I've kind of
That's an
been
interesting
experimenting
approach.
with. Yeah, it just kind of like, I don't know why I hadn't thought of it earlier, but it kind of makes sense to keep them combined up, and you get a better subsurface calculation, I feel like, between them because it's one continuous surface.
Yeah.
Um, and then I guess that kind of covers sort of the broad process
Yeah,
from
that
start to
covers.
finish. I know that doesn't get in like too in depth into some of the methodology in terms of what I'm looking at while I'm sculpting. This is kind of a broad overview as opposed to more in depth, but I think it kind of gives an idea of some of the things the way I'm approaching certain aspects of it.
No, dude, I
Um,
think it's actually been quite informative, especially
yeah,
we had a lot of questions as relates to, creating realistic skin, textures and skin detail. And I think you definitely did a great job of covering that.
Yeah, I think that the
Um,
shader itself is amazing. So I let the shader do as much work as possible and then get the shader looking right. So I'll get it at, if we come back. So I really spend a decent amount of time at like this stage here, just fine tuning and making sure the radius is correct. So like as I'm looking at this, what I'll look at is just the amount of red light and I usually do this with like one or two lights on the surface so I can really accurately see how much light is actually penetrating into the surface and how much it's spreading out. So I
Hmm.
kind of look at like, how much red is coming in here. And if this starts to get too red and starts to spread out and it starts to look a little bit too waxy and too soft, I'll start to back the radius down a little bit so I still get some solid feeling forms while still getting some of that subsurface in there. And then once you get that shader worked out, I'll slowly start to introduce color. If it's hand painted, I'll slowly introduce color and start to see what it does, and then slowly kind of ramp that up into more and more detail. Whereas on this one here, I just did the photo projection, and what I photo projected on from the texturing XYZ stuff worked really well in terms of the render because it's devoid of any shading and highlighting information. So the shader itself is doing most of the work here with some color information and the high frequency information on here.
Cool. And so, if we're let's talk about a little bit about, just the start of the process as it relates to modeling.
Sure.
So what would you say it's like, or some of the aspects of modeling, a character like this that you enjoy the most and certain aspects that you enjoy the least?
I think the parts that I like the most is probably I have a lot of fun at this stage where I'm really just kind of working out the likeness, and it's really a lot of just push and pull. The harder parts are when you start to get a little bit, for me at least, when you get a little bit deeper into the process and you start doing high frequency detail, or you start moving up through some of the higher subdivision levels of the sculpting, is that it becomes a little bit more difficult to start to kind of like rework things earlier in the process. So I enjoy this stage because there's not too many restrictions. It's just kind of fun to get in here and just push and pull points around and not be locked into too much. It's a little bit later when you start doing test renders and realize that, the UVs are a little screwed up, or I didn't properly do the UVs in one area, so then I need to re-UV something and then re-extract maps, and it becomes a little bit more of a technical process at that point. Doing map extraction and making sure that the proper UVs are correlated across to the sculpt, and making sure so the technical things a little bit later on become a little bit more difficult to deal with. So I really try to keep the process fairly linear and sort of lock things down and then move forward, instead of having to kind of like take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back and kind of keep doing this back and forth thing. I try to move a little bit more in a linear process. So this part is a little bit more fun for me, where I'm like at the early stages and I'm just kind of looking at photo reference and being a little bit more experimental with it, and just kind of pushing and pulling things around to really see what I can get out of the early subdivision levels to get that character likeness worked out.
Cool. And Tucker wants to know, at what stage in the sculpting do you start to break away from symmetrical forms?
Um, I'd say so. This right now, this is pretty symmetrical, except for some of this brow stuff in here. So once I get it probably to this stage where it's pretty well established in terms of facial proportions, and I'm happy overall with the locations of things. At this point, I'll start to go do asymmetrical stuff. And so that probably occurs pretty early on, because in order, when you're like kind of looking at reference, everyone has some level of asymmetry. And when you're really trying to establish that the characteristics of someone that you're sculpting, there's certainly asymmetry. So I try to start dialing that in at an early enough stage, but not so early that it makes it more difficult to do these larger scale changes. So I'll spend a few hours with symmetry turned on. And then once I'm happy with the overall kind of proportions and things are blocked out and I'm kind of happy with that, then I'll start to break that off and start doing asymmetry stuff.
Cool. And Roman wants to know, is this kind of workflow and detail level used for characters in films?
Yeah. So the other thing I experimented with is using well, not on this one. Let me see on this. So this guy. So early on, if we look at the early stages here, usually just get some base UVs on here. But from a more film or cinematic perspective, in order to like really maximize the detail on the character, I break this off into like a multi UV tile layout. So for this, the front of the face, I knew would get the most attention, obviously, because most of the head is covered with beard and hair. So I wanted to maximize the UVs here. And so this multi UV tile workflow is good for film, cinematic type stuff. It's not really used in games as much. I mean, there's some scenarios where it could be used, but game stuff would be more along the lines of this with a more optimized UV layout, probably for games where the UVs are probably biased a little bit more towards the front of the face, because texture resolution is always an issue with games, and you try to maximize the texture resolution where it's important, and certainly the front of the face is of high importance. So usually the UVs will be a little bit more biased towards the front of the face, and maybe the back of the head and the top of the head would be scaled down smaller, so that the front of the face would get more UV space. So yeah, so this workflow, the multi UV tile workflow, works really well because it gives you the ability to do a lot of high resolution textures, so you don't lose any of the fidelity on the surface itself.
Cool.
And that's one of the things you kind of have to, I do some tests pretty early on to make sure that before going like full on into doing the texturing XYZ stuff, I'll do a few passes of UV layouts and test doing some small areas, projecting some of the texturing XYZ information on there, and just making sure that the texture resolution and UV layout is holding the appropriate amount of detail. And then once I'm happy that it's holding that detail properly, then I'll do a final UV layout and start to actually do the work for real.
Cool. And so what's your process? I know you loosely touched upon it, but what's your process for, using XGen hairstyling?
So it's actually pretty, let me see, let me do something quick here. So we'll just take, let's take this guy, and let me hide the hair here. So generally, I'll use mostly curves to do the styling. So just as a quick example, we could just do, I could just do one pretty quick here. Let me just import a head. All right, so I'm just going to import and just do this in a fresh scene here. So what I would do, let me just set my project. So XGen requires you to have a project set, because it stores all the information as ptext files. So you have to have a project set so it can store those files appropriately. So as an example, I would probably just, I don't know, we'll just select this chunk here, and I'm just going to create a new description. We'll just call this goatee. And I'm just going to leave it in this collection. I'm just going to do splines. We're going to randomly put them across the surface, and I'm just going to do placing and shaping guides so I can put my own guide hairs on here. So from here, I can now, there's going to be hairs that you don't see any hairs here, but I need to just put some guide hairs on here. So I'm just going to use the guide hair tool here. And let me give this a second. I might have to shut my, let me just close some of these just so I have enough resources here to handle this. Hopefully Maya doesn't crash on me. But I'll generally use these guide curves on here, and then just to get the basic direction of the hair on fairly basic, like a hairstyle like this. I use just a handful of guide curves just to get the beard flowing in the right direction. Looks like Maya's taking doesn't look
Looks
like
like it's taking
do
its
this.
time.
Yeah, let me kill it. Hold on. Let me bring it back. I'll just bring back that file, and we'll look at what was generated for it. Okay, let me reload Maya here. So, for maybe a more complex hairstyle where there's very specific directionality and it has to be a little bit more groomed properly, then more guide curves could be used. But I'll just show you the guide curves, because there's not that many on here, and most of the effect is coming from the modifiers on the XGen. So let me just, Maya's loading back up here. Let me just get my file back up. Let's see. Let me just get my
And as
project
that's
set here.
pulling up, we have another, hair related questions. Are there alternatives to cards for hair? And what are the advantages and disadvantages?
Well, cards are going to be used in games, so there's not really an alternative to cards in games. It's always going to be some sort of card-based thing, because you can't really do like a hair system like XGen just won't really run in an engine yet that I've seen. So hair cards for games, that's the way to go. For anything rendered, I've been using XGen pretty much exclusively, and it's worked out quite well. So let me go and we'll look at the beard here. So these are the guide hairs for the beard. They basically just get the general direction flowing properly for the beard. Let me just do preview current. And I'm just going to turn on the update automatically. And then just so we can see a little bit better, I'm just going to knock the density down to like 20, and we'll bring the all right, so just so we can see the hairs better. And so I'll turn the guide hairs off. So I'll basically just make a selection of faces of where I want this hair to grow from, attach an XGen description on it, put these guide curves on, which can either be generated manually by placing guides on here and drawing them out manually, or the other option is you could potentially take something like I had in the earlier version of this guy where there was like geometry blocked out for the hair. You can draw NURBS curves on there and convert those into XGen guide curves using the utilities. So you can select a whole bunch of NURBS curves and do curves to guides, and it'll convert them into these guides that XGen can kind of recognize. And so once I get so if we look at what it gives me without doing anything, this is just the basic directionality to the hair itself. So it's nothing that doesn't look good at all, but it just gets the direction going. And then I'll start doing the ones I generally use for this type of stuff is just clump modifiers and noise modifiers. So the first clump here is generally like the most broad. It's like the largest scale clumping, and then I'll slowly up the sort of density so that we start getting tighter clumps, and then even tighter. I may need to bring up the density just a little bit so we can see more hairs, and maybe drop this to like a little bit so we can kind of see it clumping together a little bit more. And so once I get that stuff in there, that starts to give it a little bit more visual interest that there's clumping going on and it's moving in the right directions. And then once I get that locked in, let me turn these guides off. I'll just start adding noise modifiers into here, which just kind of break things up a little bit so you can kind of see everything's just kind of flowing and clumping together here. And then I can just start using noise modifiers on here to kind of give it these random kind of stray hairs that kind of fly off the surface. And that kind of gives it a little bit more of a scraggly type of look. And then on the fly, I can kind of tweak this stuff. I can reduce the amount of noise at the tip here, so I can kind of bring some of this in, and you get kind of pretty good realistic real-time feedback on exactly what this stuff is doing. I could even take this and bump the frequency up to like 5 so we get much more frizzy hair. You can really kind of see how much more frizzy it gets in here. Or I can take the frequency down and bump the magnitude up, so the magnitude will just scale things out much larger. So if we went to like a magnitude of 4, you can see it just kind of blows things out. So you can do a lot with noise and clumping to get really quick feedback and get different kinds of looks to the hair. So I just went through and did that on all the different parts of the hair, just using guide curves to do that. So if we look at like the top of the hair here, and then look at the guide curves, and then just kill this. So these are just a bunch of guide curves that were generated by drawing NURBS curves onto the rough geometry and just converting it into guide curves that XGen can use. And so the same thing is done here. So if I hide this, we can zoom in a little bit. So basically the same workflow, just noise and clump modifiers, and you can see the base shape originally is not all that interesting. And then once we start to add in these modifiers for clumping, again, broad to more fine. And so that kind of gets things looking realistically. Oh, sorry about that. There goes my dog. Yeah, so and then the noise, I progressively build up different kinds of noise here to do different types of effects, get more of like these flyaway hairs and just kind of break things up even further. And that can give some pretty interesting looks. So really for me, I mean, it's just basic direction with the guide curves and then adding these modifiers to get interesting looking hair going. And
Cool.
so, and you'll notice too, I kind of break things up into different more manageable sectors and chunks. So like the top of the hair is separate because of the directionality of this, it's just easier to manage this as like a top chunk. And then the side chunk here is a completely separate, just because the way the hairstyle is. It is like the hair is kind of pulled back from here into like a ponytail, and then on the sides, it's growing off the sides here. And so it's just easier to manage these things as sort of separate chunks where they're kind of isolated off. And that just makes it a little bit easier to kind of deal with complex hairstyles. So kind of isolating things off into manageable pieces.
Cool, dude.
Yeah.
That's great, man. Thanks for that little quick
Yeah.
demo.
Cool.
What are the differences in approach in process when working on a non-human character? I would imagine it's very similar to an extent, right?
In terms the process for non-human, like
Like if you're doing a creature.
oh, for creature related stuff, yeah, it's very similar. I mean, I think for a creature, I would probably tend to utilize a little bit more ZBrush in terms of probably using Dynamesh and maybe Z spheres or something like that, just to kind of really push and pull shapes in and out and really experiment. And then there comes a point where you kind of lock into what the general shape and form is, and then at that point, I would kind of branch it off and make a clean, organized base mesh that can be UV'd. I think the big thing for me is like I need to get the technical things sorted out at some point. And so once I'm kind of happy with a design or whatever it is I'm working on, I'll get a clean, organized base mesh on there that I can UV and kind of push it through the rest of the pipeline. But yeah, I think, creature stuff earlier on is a little bit more experimental. You can kind of be a little bit more playful, I guess, with some of the forms and utilize other tools. But then there comes a point where you do want to lock things down if you really want to push it to like a final rendered character, skin shader, and you want to do textures. Then it makes sense to at a certain point make
Cool.
a good base mesh on there and use displacement maps and all that good stuff.
Definitely. So, kind of taking a step back and looking at, just the role of a character artist, um, how would you say the role has changed, over the last 5 years?
I think
Or
I
just
kind
in
of mentioned
general
this.
from the
Yeah,
time you
I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I think we're starting to see like even more specialization even within the uh, character art role. I mean, it's kind of going to depend obviously from like company to company and project to project, but um, there's with new technology in terms of scanning and facial performance capture, you almost have like some separation between character artists who are just doing head stuff, doing facial expressions, blend shapes, that sort of stuff, and then you have other people who are potentially responsible for just hair systems, and you have another group of people who could be just responsible for doing body work, clothing, modeling, and then even within that, you may even get subsets of specializations where you have people who are really great with doing stuff in Marvelous Designer for doing clothing. So you could have a very dedicated, specialized team that just does clothing work from Marvelous Designer. So certainly, again, like I mentioned, it could be different from company to company. Like a smaller company where you have slightly more generalists, then maybe the character artist does a wide range of things. But as you get into more high-end film cinematics and like AAA gaming, there becomes a little bit more of a break off, and there becomes some more specializations in terms of roles, just because of the amount of time it takes
yeah,
and the skill required for some of these tasks. I mean, you can't really kind of do some facial expressions every now and again and expect to be really, really good at it. The people who are really good at it are doing it nonstop.
exactly,
So yeah,
exactly. It's yeah. So it's just really it's a specialist, specializing as really to just characters. But as you said, even going further into it, I think especially as these characters get more and more complex,
yeah, yep,
in more detail and really pushing that, level of realism and believability and even
sure.
the technology as well, it kind of opens it up to that. So, so Claudio has a question, that kind of ties into another question. So I'm going to lump them together. His
Okay.
question is, when reviewing other artists' work, say for a job, what do you look at? What do you look for, in terms of red flags? And this ties into another question that someone has, which are, what are three things that a character artist needs to really grow? Or if I could phrase it, it's or if we could change, let me just rephrase this to, what do
Sure.
you think separates a good character artist from a great character artist?
Um, Well, I mean, so there's kind of two aspects of it. One aspect that I think is easily visible, and that's just the quality of the artwork and like attention to detail. But then the other aspect that's not really seen, which sometimes takes a little bit more to find out about a person, is what their sort of technical proficiency is as well. Because I mean, you could be a fantastic character artist in terms of your sculpting and your texturing, but then if your scene files that you're handing off to other artists or your technical things aren't really in order, it makes it I mean, it can be difficult to work with people who aren't technically savvy in terms of organization and naming things and just being very clean with the way they work. And not just like scene organization, but like poly modeling. It's handing models off between departments. You want to have clean models that don't have any non-manifold geometry. So those types of things, it's harder to judge when you're just looking at someone's portfolio, because you can't necessarily tell what the technical proficiency is. So I would suggest, anyone who's starting to get into this and doing this, is obviously you need to focus on and make sure that the artwork and the visual stuff is really solid, but don't neglect the technical aspects either. So just make sure you have an understanding of the technical things of modeling with point orders and non-manifold geometry and scene organization and clean UV layout, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of technical things that go into it as well. So
Yeah,
I think that's probably one of the things that separates good character artists from great ones, is the good ones have really good and potentially even great visual artwork, but then kind of lack some of the technical side of things. And I think a great character artist can probably do both to a high level, both
no,
artistically and the technical aspects as well, and can kind of be self-sufficient to sort of sort out problems and do a bunch of problem solving to kind of work through things.
exactly. I completely agree with you. And to that, point, Kerr has a question. With all the technicality involved, how will your course help me as a student focus on the art side of things and not get lost in these technicalities?
So the courses that I teach, I talk a bunch about both, because I think you need to have both. And so, it's always kind of a bummer when you see someone's portfolio and it's just straight like sculpts, ZBrush sculpts, that sort of thing. And so it's like, oh, you have great sculpts, but I can't really tell if again, about poly modeling, or how proficient you are with poly modeling, or if you know how to keep meshes clean and organize things. So the course itself, the two courses that I'm doing, talk a lot about both in terms of base mesh organization, keeping clean geometry, as well as doing the artistic stuff. So it's kind of a mix of both, which I think is pretty valuable for anyone looking to learn about both of those sides of things.
Cool. And so regarding the class, are there any interactions and personalized feedback that happens during the course?
Yeah, so the way it works is there's the lecture videos every week, like 2.5 hours worth of content on a particular topic, and then there's an assignment, and then students can submit their files to me, whether it's images, models. It's better. I like it more when I get actual models and textures and all that stuff, because I can actually go into ZBrush or Mudbox, and what I'll do is do like a 50, it's usually like 10, 15, 20 minutes worth of recorded feedback of me kind of looking at the model and doing tweaks to it and kind of demonstrating certain things. And then after that's done, there's a live question and answer session every week. So any questions that need to be answered, any demonstration can be done live during the week. So there's you get kind of the lecture stuff, the feedback, and then the live session to kind of work through problems.
Okay, great. So that's amazing. You're actually pulling in their models and
Yeah.
checking on actually tweaking them and
Yeah,
everything.
because it's very difficult to do that stuff just on a flat 2D image. Just especially when you talk about facial bone structure, that sort of thing. Like if the brow is not quite working, or the eyelid's not receding back enough, it's very difficult to kind of show that or to explain that in a 2D image. It makes more sense and is easier to demonstrate when I have the actual model and can just kind of push and pull things around and better explain what I'm talking about.
Cool. And so are you gonna be covering the entire character, so as it relates to costumes and props, and also what type of software would they need for the class?
Sure. So yeah, the characters for cinematics class does cover a full character, but it's actually been pretty interesting. Each term that I've taught it, um, and this is obviously to be expected. Everyone's excited to make a full character. So I do show the entire process of making a full character, not every single individual piece, because it would get pretty redundant to watch me model a glove and then watch a boot and then watch a knee pad. It's pretty similar workflow and process. So there's a lot of stuff in there on general poly modeling, sculpting techniques, different ways to approach different problems. It does show the full character, but I strongly urge people to just pull the expectation back a little bit, because there's so many unforeseen hiccups and snags you're going to run into in the process while you're also learning, that building a full character in a 10-week period while you're learning how to do it is like almost impossible. So I've
Yeah.
generally had people start off that way, and then usually after the course ends, they spend more time on it, and I'll see progress after the course, and that's to be expected. So usually what I try to tell people is to just pull the expectation back a little bit and watch the videos, but maybe focus more on like a bust, so you get experience with doing the head, hair, doing some costuming stuff, doing some prop stuff. So there's a range of exposure to a bunch of different things. And then the course kind of covers Maya, Mudbox, ZBrush, Marvelous Designer, Photoshop, Substance Painter, V-Ray, Arnold. So kind
Wow.
of everything, yeah,
Yeah.
through that process to kind of get coverage on just about every sort of part of the process.
Cool. And I think to that point, as you mentioned about, doing a full character, in 10 weeks, it's like, especially if you're just starting out or you're even a
Yeah.
junior artist, it's like understanding quality first,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
right? Like,
And even for somebody very experienced, that's a pretty tall order to make a
yeah,
very
yeah,
high quality cinematic or film level character in a 10 to 12 week period. I mean,
exactly.
that's a lot of work. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. I completely agree. We have tons more questions, but Pete, I know you're taking your lunch
Yeah.
break,
Sure.
to
Yeah.
chat with us, and you have to, head out. So we're gonna, unfortunately
Cool.
have to, cut it now. But thank you so much, Pete, for just taking us through your
Sure.
process
Yeah,
and,
that was
and,
fun.
and
Yeah, I
sharing with
enjoyed
us a
doing
lot
this.
of just, your knowledge, on
Cool.
everything. And guys, for some of you, it's like, actually several of you, I didn't get, to your questions. It's like, we'll try to do another session. But as said, Pete is he needs to
Yeah,
run
or
back
you
to
can,
work.
feel free. You can email me if you have anything in particular, and I can get back to you.
Definitely, definitely. But
Cool.
Pete, thank you so much again,
Thanks.
man.
Yeah,
It's like
thanks for having me.
absolutely amazing job. Great,
Cool.
great, great looking characters, dude.
Thank you. Thank you.
So and everybody, it's like, the link for Pete's class is, on the sticky above. Definitely check it out. If you have any questions, you can email me or email Pete. Let us know. But yeah, it's like, some of the work that the students are doing in this class is absolutely amazing. And I
Yeah,
know
it's
we have,
been pretty fun to see the progression, even from
yeah,
start to finish. That there's a lot of good work happening.
definitely, definitely. So thank you so much, guys.
Cool.
And once again, it's thank you for joining us. And I'll see you guys in class. See you guys around.
Cool. Thanks, Manny.
All right. Take care, Pete.
All right. Bye bye.
And everybody have a great weekend. And for those of you who are currently enjoying your weekend, take care.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye.